Good morning. My name is Donna Hoylman-Peduto, and I'm Executive Director of West Virginia Public Education Collaborative. On behalf of the PEC and its partners, West Virginia Forward and the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, I would like to welcome each of you and tell you how thrilled we are that you joined us today in our second annual Focus Forward Symposium. This is the second in an annual series designed to address the most pressing issues, both the challenges and opportunities in West Virginia for education and the economy. Last year, and many of you were with us, would you raise your hand if you were the first? Thank you. We addressed the topics of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We were really encouraged by the feedback that we received, very positive, but even more important, the takeaways that came out of that. We see them in action throughout our state, and we hope this year we'll have the same results. This year, we've reconvened to focus on big data and its impact in education and the economy. And it's already having quite an effect, as you know, on education and the economy, and we're going to explore today, through our wonderful speakers that we have, the effects that will be going forward in the future. Now, I know you've read about the data-related careers are some of the fastest growing in the last 3 years, but that's brought some challenges and opportunities, and I know our speakers will do a great job addressing those. We're so pleased to bring you to here because you're our thought leaders that will collaborate with us throughout the year and today to help us move forward. Now, our partner organizations that I already mentioned, the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative, West Virginia Forward, and the Claude Worthington Benedum, are a dynamic duo. They're with one added, our Benedum Foundation, a trio. And we've really enjoyed thinking about the big picture about what's new in West Virginia and how to address it. And we'd especially like to thank the Benedum Foundation for the presidential award that they've given us. This support really demonstrates the importance of this today and its outcome for both policy and practice in West Virginia. In the Public Education Collaborative, our mission is to address P20, and we want to champion public education, but also bring together K-12 and higher ed. And that's why Focus Forward is especially important to us, to be able to see all facets of this. And by joining forces and linking education and economy, as we will do today, we can make sure that students are ready for the jobs of the future. So thank you for helping us make Focus Forward really dynamic, and your forward-thinking voices will be heard today. Now, I'd like to introduce a video greeting from two exceptional forward-thinking voices who couldn't be here in person. And special congratulations to one of them, Marshall University's President Jerome Gilbert. He's a new grandfather. So that's where he's at today. And certainly thank President E. Gordon Gee. They have a few remarks they'd like to share with you before we dive right into big data and get to work.
Good morning. I regret that I can't be with you in person today, but I am happy to welcome all of you to the second annual Focus Forward Symposium. I love to say that, by the way. So thank you for being thought leaders and collaborators and for claiming a seat at the table today as we prepare for tomorrow's rapidly evolving world, as we all well know. And I give a very special thanks to the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative and, of course, West Virginia Forward and the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation for hosting this event. These three organizations have forged a dynamic partnership that puts their fingers on the pulse of our state's pressing issues. Focus Forward, by the way, is the only event designed to link two of those issues, education and economic development, for what I hope is an in-depth look at our emerging workforce needs. So we're building on the success of last year's event, which examined how machine learning and artificial intelligence will affect future jobs and skill requirements. Today's discussion, of course, will dive more deeply into our education system. So I want you all to think for a second. Let's ask ourselves, how can we best prepare our students to drive West Virginia's economy and succeed in this immensely changing workforce. As AI develops and the data landscape explodes, now is the time to explore the promise and potential of these fields to ignite West Virginia's economic growth. We live in a world where knowledge is truly power. The era of big data is here. And with change comes great opportunity. So let's stack our hands and explore innovative approaches to ensure West Virginia can grow, compete, and of course prosper in this revolutionary age. So I challenge you all to come together today to brainstorm strides towards West Virginia's promising future. And needless to say, I look forward to hearing what ideas emerge and what partnerships arise during Focus Forward 2019. Now, as we all know, collaboration is an important key to success, and we are happy to work with our sister institution, Marshall University, on many development projects around the state. Our two universities, as you know, bring different strengths to the table, and this diversity is to be celebrated. So before you get to work, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the president of Marshall University and my good friend, Jerry Gilbert.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be with you today, but I want to thank all the individuals that have been involved in putting together the Focus Forward Symposium. I want to thank all the groups such as the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative, West Virginia Forward, and also the Benedum Foundation. I truly believe that collaboration and teamwork are important today, and we at Marshall believe in working inside and outside the university in collaborative fashion. We're partnering with other universities like WVU on many of the topics that are being covered in the symposium today. Some of the important trends in industry are big data and artificial intelligence, so this is fertile ground for us to work on economic development and also on education. Let me close by telling you to think big and to be bold in what you do. We need great ideas to move West Virginia forward and to transform our state. Thank you.
To introduce Rochelle Goodwin, and she's Associate Vice President of West Virginia University, and today representing West Virginia Forward, a marvelous statewide initiative. She's going to tell you what to expect from the day and the lay of the land here.
Thank you so much, Donna. You know, Donna and the PEC staff, Maggie is over here working really hard, and Gail is the chair, put a tremendous amount of effort into today. So let's thank them really for all that they did to invest in every detail. Thanks for the introduction, Donna. So yes, my name is Rochelle Goodwin. I work at WVU, but with West Virginia Forward. And we have two terrific trios. We have the PEC, West Virginia Forward, and Benedum trio we talked about. But for West Virginia Forward, we also have the core beginning partners were WVU, Marshall, and Commerce, and we have representatives from all three of those entities here. I know Mike Graney is here today with us as well with that partnership. And what we want to look at is how bringing together government and higher education, or as we heard President Gee say for today, it's a very unique event that brings together education and economic development. And that's really how we solve our problems as we move forward. So I want to just take a minute and let you know the other great thought leaders, as Donna mentioned, you're all thought leaders here today, who you are. We have presidents of universities and colleges, if you want to raise your hand and identify as some of these stakeholders. We have parents with kids in classes through P through 20 in the state of West Virginia, and faculty members who are teaching those kids. We have decision makers in education. We have business leaders here today, and we have government and nonprofit. All of you see a perspective that we want to examine today. And you're great puzzle workers. So we're going to take the pieces today, and your challenge, as President Gilbert laid out today, we're going to be bold. We're going to think big. There's no such thing as a free lunch, so y'all enjoy your lunch. But what we're going to ask of you today is to do some big, bold problem solving. And we're going to get specific on that. Because this is why are we here today? We know that the jobs, when we talk about our economy or how the state does, we are talking about the jobs and the opportunities to give back, to grow that economic engine, to give back to our communities. And one of the biggest sources of fuel for that engine, that economic engine, is our human capital. It's our people. So we have to be able to give the training and the skills to those people and the right kind of environment to business to be able to recognize our full promise. So we're going to do something at the end of the day. Everybody's going to have a charge to think about what you can go forward at the end of today and do in your world to recognize our assets, what West Virginia has to offer. We have incredible people. The warmest, most driven people you'll find anywhere. That's a fact. That's not an opinion by somebody who's a West Virginian by birth or by choice. That's a data-driven fact that we are more deeply rooted to our sense of place and our purpose than lots of people in lots of different places. We also have some potential with some of the assets that you're going to hear about later. We really have incredible assets in the state of West Virginia, from a supercomputer that you're going to learn about, incredible opportunity for a living laboratory on what we do with data and how we turn big data into big business. We have one degree of connection among all of us, so we know that we can get things done and we can be innovative as we move forward. And we can write our next chapter. So when we hear these great success stories about places around the country where they've reignited their economic engines and they've brought people together to do amazing new things in emerging business. And that's what we want to commit to here, because we have a great business climate. We have wonderful talent, low workforce turnover, high loyalty. We know that we're positioned in a great place that has access geographically to lots of other centers around the country. And we're going to learn about some of the assets that are really relevant to this conversation, like the Boy Scouts 5G network in Camp Dawson, or the supercomputer we talked about earlier. What's going on in healthcare that's cutting edge, like RNI, the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute's cloud, that's allowing us to really think differently about how we treat our chronic and chronic diseases and human performance. So today is about pulling together, putting those puzzle pieces in the right place, and making sure we fulfill our promise. And I'll tell you, I am one of those, we listed all those stakeholders. I'm a parent. My husband and I both had public school teachers as parents. We have one child in private school and one child in public school. My husband is an employer, and I've been in state government and federal government and higher ed, and we really care about this. But we know that that's what all of you, your families look like too, and the desire for us to get this right. So one more thing I'll share with you on a personal note, if you'll indulge. My daughter, Anna, is the lead in Matilda this weekend, and I don't know if anybody's seen the Roald Dahl book or the Broadway musical. She's in the Broadway musical. But the reason I'm telling you that is not only to spur economic development at the Alban, if you want to go see it, but more importantly, she has been singing her heart out about how we write our own story, right? You remember that part of that book? That Romeo and Juliet, it was written in the stars before they met. And why didn't they just change their story? Well, today is about writing our next chapter and changing our story. And you've got the right people to do it. I hope that at some point in time, you'll meet some of your colleagues around today, because the people in this, I get really excited. The people in this room really can write our own next story. And you'll see that what we learn about today is really a chance for dialogue. So we're going to kick this off with two incredible people that I do hope that on a coffee break, you'll go introduce yourself to these two amazing speakers because they have so much to offer that we can learn from and create a model today on how we design our infrastructure, our policy, and how we take care of our developing our people and our talent. So Tom Mitchell, I'll begin with. Tom, raise your hand. There you go. You're going to see Tom here in a minute. I was told that I only had a couple seconds to share about each of these speakers, and I hate that because I could tell you amazing things all day long about both of them. But Tom is a dean at Carnegie Mellon University, but he is an absolute pioneer in machine learning. He had the foresight and the vision to create the first in the world. He's co-founder of the Center for Automated Learning and Discovery, which was the very first machine learning department on the planet. And that's really looking at a branch of artificial intelligence where you teach computers to use data and patterns in decision-making that help us to make sense of things. And I know the Adjutant General Hoare has talked about all this data. You need to learn how to use it and make sense of it. Those are the two things that we need to do with data. And that's what your leadership and kind of trailblazing in this space has allowed us to start thinking about, and designed the first PhD program in machine learning so that we're connecting, again, that opportunity for growth in the economy with how we're managing to train and educate our people. So thank you. We look forward to hearing more about that. And we just got in a fascinating discussion with these two keynote speakers that I wish you were all privy to, but do go see them, about how this machine learning and data, big data, is really going to change how we think about things globally, not just here in West Virginia. And we want to be ahead of the curve there. The other keynote speaker that I want to introduce you to is a West Virginian by birth. So we're always, partial. Anybody can be a West Virginian by choice, and we'll give all of you honorary membership here. But I know Doug Perry still has his heart in West Virginia. Welcome, Doug. Doug has an incredible job. He is the CIO for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. NOAA has so much data, it's hard to fathom. And what we do with that data and how we understand that, so General Hoyer's point of using and sharing that data is a matter of life and death for all of us, truly. I mean, there is really a huge responsibility in the data that Doug manages every day. Not only that, he's created an award-winning program that's pairing up this public-private partnership of how we best use data and how we rely on kind of crowdsourcing in the private sector some developments that reduce costs for us to be better able to predict and better use that data that we're going to hear about today. And he's going to tell us about the ABCs. So this is good to keep in mind. We're going to hear more about the technology kind of terms in your glossary. But A is artificial intelligence, and B, big data, how we use those two in the cloud, right? Those are the ABCs. And we're going to talk more about that. So I'm thrilled. I wish I could spend more time singing their praises because they are, and you'll find out here when they speak, they're wonderful, as well as the contributions that we're going to hear from our panelists the rest of today on education, our assets, and then those entrepreneurship opportunities. And then we're going to quiz y'all to pay for your lunch on the big ideas that you have come up with at the end. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning. I want to thank Donna and the rest of the organizers for putting this together. I'm very much looking forward to learning a lot about what you all are thinking the rest of the day and hanging out together and brainstorming. I have to say that even though I wasn't born in West Virginia, I do live in the westernmost county of Maryland, 5 miles from West Virginia. So maybe you can have some sympathy. What I want to do today, here we are, good, is quickly just kind of paint a broad picture, remind us all what's been going on in AI, but more interestingly, what might be going on over the next 10 years, what some of the implications of that might be for future products, for future business, future jobs, and what the government might want to do about it. So first, let's just think. This is a non-AI clicker. There we go. Just think about the dramatic, truly dramatic progress that's happened over the last 10 years in AI. 10 years ago, computers were basically blind and deaf. Here's a plot showing progress in computer vision, that is, building computer programs that can recognize objects in common photographs, like the ones you see here. And that plot on the right shows year by year, starting in 2010, the accuracy of the best computer program for recognizing objects and images. The horizontal line is human level of capability. And so just in 10 years, computers have gone from being unable to look at this table and see what's there to being able to fairly reliably label each of the items on the table. Similarly, in computer speech recognition, 10 years ago when the iPhone came out, for example, it's hard to remember, but you could not talk to your iPhone when it came out because speech recognition didn't work. But again, here's a plot showing year over year the increase in accuracy of computer-based transcription from speech signals to the corresponding text. Computers obviously still don't understand natural language. They won't understand this talk. But they are as good as people are at transcribing from the speech sounds to the corresponding text. In the area of robots, there's been great progress too. In Pittsburgh and in many places now we have, at least on trial basis, self-driving vehicles driving around the city streets. And robots in a lot of other areas too, including medical surgery. In the area of strategic reasoning, which is exemplified by game playing, chess, Go. Again, computers have gone in the last 10 years from being pretty good to being absolutely phenomenally good at pretty much any board game. I don't think there's any board game left, or even poker left, where computers aren't the dominant intellect on the planet. So in all of these cases, it seems kind of a coincidence that we would have, in a single decade, all of these disparate kinds of progress. But actually, it's not a coincidence. The reason is the same for each of those areas, and it's machine learning. What's happened over the past decade is AI researchers have undergone a paradigm shift away from the idea that we could build by hand computer programs that do computer vision, speech, game playing, and instead switch to a paradigm where we train the program showing it examples. So for example, if you take something you can do very well, recognize your mother in a photograph, we all can do that, but nobody has ever been able to write down a computer program to recognize their mother in a photograph. On the other hand, it's now very easy to train a computer program to do that. You give it training examples of the form, here's a photograph and there's my mother. Here's another photograph, my mother is not in this one, etc. And with enough examples like that, the system can learn to take a look at a new photograph and identify the faces and then whether or not it's your mother. In fact, that's why on my Apple laptop, when I download photos, the first thing it does is label the faces of the people in those photos. So machine learning is actually the key, and that's the tie to big data. In order to make these systems work, we need substantial amounts of data. For example, one recent advance in the area of medicine is that computers have become at least as good as dermatologists at looking at skin blemishes and classifying which of those skin blemishes are cancerous. In order to train that system, researchers got 130,000 labeled examples of skin blemishes, and months later, the ground truth about which of those skin blemishes were cancerous. And so that's the scale of data that we're talking about. In fact, in many natural language applications, the data is even much bigger, including millions or sometimes billions of text documents. So big data and machine learning are really underlying all of these areas, which leads to many opportunities. And I'm sure you've all thought about these, from self-driving cars to improved agriculture, improved weather prediction, which Doug is going to talk about, and many other potential beneficial outcomes from AI. So if you think about that's where we kind of have come from and are, what are new opportunities? Well, that list there was kind of a set of new opportunities. And when I think about the ones that are likely to impact us the most in the coming decade, I do believe that we will have self-driving cars on interstate highways. There will be a long time before they can handle the dirt roads down in the hollers, but on interstate highways, already when I was driving down last night from Western Maryland, I have an Audi that has lane control, and I can take my hands off the steering wheel and it'll steer. After half a minute, it buzzes and refuses to do it anymore because it doesn't want me to think it's a self-driving car. But between that and the automatic speed control, basically it's already not perfect, but on its way. So for that kind of technology, there will be, I think, commercial systems that do self-driving on interstate highways this decade, and the economic implications of that are very significant. Another area where I think is really interesting to think about is the commoditization of cell phone capabilities. So these days you can buy a camera for about 10 cents if you do it at scale. You can buy a microphone for under $1. Speakers cost a little bit more if you want to be able to hear them. But basically you could put together a light bulb for about $15 in the coming decade that will have a camera, a microphone, a speaker, internet connectivity. By the way, it doesn't need a battery because it's a light bulb and it's plugged into the wall. And if we give that same light bulb AI and machine learning capabilities, that I think is going to be the seed of a huge impact on the economy. Why would we want these kind of things? Well, think about it. If we had a light bulb positioned in a patient's hospital room, and that light bulb was able to see and hear and speak and learn from the patterns of activity that it sees below itself, what would it learn? What would you learn if you were sitting in the ceiling of a patient room for a year? You would learn very tedious patterns that happen routinely. You'd learn that the nurse comes in usually, often if he or she has medications, she gives them to the patient, and the patient ingests them all. You'd learn that when the patient gets up to use the toilet, they usually don't lie on the floor on the way. They walk right in there, and then they come back and get in bed. And after you learn those things, you'd be able to spot anomalies. Maybe the nurse came in, left the medications, but they're the wrong ones. They don't jive with the electronic medical record. Hospital errors, routine errors. What if you had one in your kitchen? There it is. While you're cooking dinner. Again, that computer light bulb watching you, learning the routines, and knowing the recipe that you're cooking could remind you, hey, it's time to get the butter off the stove before it burns. If you had one of these in a coffee shop, that light bulb, what could it learn? It could learn that usually when people get up and leave the coffee shop, they bring their purse with them and their cell phone. They don't usually leave them behind on the table. They'd learn that usually when people get up, within 2 minutes, one of the staff comes by and cleans up the table. And they could spot anomalies to those and sound warnings. So if you let your mind go with this, the key idea here is low-cost commodity pricing on cell phone functionality in every light bulb for $15 or so, plus the important thing, AI machine learning algorithms. What kind of data could you collect? And by the way, these light bulbs are in Wi-Fi connectivity, so they can share data. The one out in the lobby could tell us whether there's still people streaming into the room and whether we should start the meeting. Okay, so those are just some of the kinds of things that I think we should really start thinking about now, because AI progress has not stopped. In fact, it has accelerated. And so the amazing things that we've seen over the past decade are really just the beginning runway for what we're going to see. So obviously this will have impacts on jobs, and I have the good fortune to co-chair a U.S. National Academy study on automation and its impact on the future of work. So I wanted to share with you some of the ideas that came out of that report. The main idea to come out of the report is that AI and information technology broadly are going to have multiple impacts on the workforce, some positive, some negative, and it's hard to know the relative magnitudes. It's hard to add them up. So surely AI will eliminate some jobs. Toll booth operators, that job is going away. Do not recommend it as a career for your child. It's impacting education, both the demand for education. We will need a workforce that invests a lot more in continuing education than in the past, but it also is impacting the supply of education. Already you can download YouTube videos that help in all kinds of training, like how to clean a bath and other more probably profitable enterprises. But and there's also research going on at a number of places on how to build AI into computer-based tutoring systems so that the systems can learn from the big data of millions of students taught how to be a better teacher, how to more accurately pinpoint what is the state of knowledge of this particular student at the moment, and therefore which question or which video should I show them next. This also has impacts on, can we just advance it manually? New business models. So in fact, there's a lot of talk about the gig economy, companies like Uber, but also Upwork, which is a gig economy for computer programs to work from home, or GL Group, which is a high-end consulting gig system. Those systems are actually very much dependent on AI technology for doing the matching. Uber exists, for example, because of sophisticated AI algorithms that can match up, put the drivers in the right place where with high probability there are going to be riders there in the next 5 minutes who need a driver. There are one of the negative impacts of technology on the workforce is further skewing of income and wealth. So it turns out, compared to, say, the automobile industry, where when there was the invention of the automobile, there were many corollary jobs created, like maintenance, shipping the automobile, and so forth. But in the software world, maintenance is a much smaller demand on the economy. And transportation of software, of course, happens in seconds worldwide without hiring truckers to take the automobiles there, to take the software there. So that's another conclusion. I'm sorry, I'm apparently inept at clicking correctly. There we go. Another thing that we have found looking in this study is that even though education by the internet, over the internet, is more accessible than ever, it's actually unequal access. So it turns out the people who do the best at learning from online education are people who are already highly disciplined learners, and people who haven't been successful in school do not actually gain the benefits. So it's a positive move, but it's also a skewing of the opportunity. So those are some of the study results. Since then, we've spent some time digging in. My co-chair on the study, Eric Brynjolfsson, and I have done some work looking more at what governments can do about this. And without going into details, because I don't want to overstep my time, let me just say that some of the additional points that I would like to make are, number one, we're really flying blind into the future of jobs. We don't know the answer to very simple questions like, which technology had the biggest impact on the workforce last year? We don't know that. Why? Because government data doesn't cover that. What can we do about it? We ought to have public-private data partnerships, because if you think about the data out there, Indeed.com, Monster.com, the job websites have daily refreshed data about the supply of jobs and the skill requirements for those jobs. Companies like LinkedIn have a lot of data about the supply of skills that workers actually have. The Bureau of Labor Statistics uses neither of those. We interviewed the head of the Bureau in our study, and it's just not done. It's not the tradition of government to partner with private data. But obviously, if we could put that data together, we could do a much better job of informing our population, our citizens, about where are the shortages and the surpluses in skills. There's an example of this in Europe. The OECD has a wonderful website that I encourage you to take a look at, where they gather data on skill supply and demand in different countries. If you go to their data set, you can see very clearly there's a surplus of mathematically trained people in Romania. There is a shortage of mathematically trained people in the Netherlands. If you were a mathematically trained person in Romania, that's very useful information. Furthermore, they've gone beyond just logging the skill supply and demand to the point where they're beginning to link that to educational opportunities. So, for example, they also can tell people that if you are a welder, if you're a trained welder, then in an area where there's a surplus of welders, one of the modest efforts that you can do in terms of continuing education is to become an electrician. There's enough overlap in the skills of welders and electricians that that's a move that you can make. And furthermore, here's a course you can take. So I think the future of what we need to get to in this country and worldwide is more visibility about what's actually going on, and then linking the real-time data about skill supply and demand to educational opportunities that people can take advantage of. It's a great role for government to take on. Okay, I really don't want to use too much time here, so if I can flip forward through many slides here. I don't want you to look at these, don't read them. But I'm so slow at fast forwarding. Okay, what should governments do? So let me just end like this. There are a number of studies. There are a number of studies that have been done and AI policy reports by the US government. In the House and the Senate, there is now an AI caucus. A slide that we've... Just leave it there, please. Here's what I want to say. There are a number of studies that are out there from different groups. They pretty much are saying the same thing, and it's good. They say things like we need to invest in growing the AI workforce. We need to invest in better continuing education for people who are going to be affected, and so forth. Those are all good, and we should be doing them, and people are pretty much trying to figure out how to do those now. There are a couple things that we're not doing. that I think need to be part of what we're doing. One is we need to understand and articulate what some of the trade-offs actually are in terms of policy decisions. So for example, let's take self-driving vehicles. That's going to reduce deaths. It's going to reduce highway deaths. It's also going to impact jobs. So there's going to be some trade-off there between having fewer highway deaths and having fewer trucker jobs. How do we play that trade-off? Well, that's a policy issue, and we need to debate it and figure out how to minimize the negative and maximize the positive. But without articulating clearly what that trade-off is, we're never going to be able to have a rational discussion. Here's another example that's even more interesting. We could build, on the topic of big data, we could build a national database of medical records in the United States. We've had electronic medical records for 25 years, and we're still not getting the benefit of them because we don't aggregate those into a national data resource so that we can mine that data and discover better diagnosis and treatment strategies, discover more quickly the side effects of new drugs that get released by the FDA. We don't do that. When I talk to people, why not? A large part of the argument is privacy. So there is another trade-off here, privacy and health. We could have better health with less privacy or better privacy with less health. It's another trade-off. One of the interesting things about that trade-off curve is that research in AI can actually shift the whole curve for the better. And I'll end just on this very simple example to give you the idea. Suppose we want to know the average income of everybody in this room. And let's assume nobody wants to write it down on a piece of paper and hand it to me. I can make up a very big random number. I won't tell you it, but it'll be like 1,047,000,000,000 something. I'll hand it to Doug. He adds in his salary. He hands it to the next person who adds in her salary, hers, his. Goes around the room. Everybody adds in their salary. It comes back to me. None of you know anything about anybody's salary except your own. I subtract my big random number from the total that I received, and I divide by the number of people in the room. I know the average salary. That's a zero knowledge method of getting statistical data from each of you with no privacy threat. It's an interesting example. It's a good one to explain to your congressman. Point out when you do that you could have all been hospitals instead of people. And my query could have been, how many of your pneumonia patients are over 65? I get the answer. What fraction of those had this drug treatment? I get the answer. What fraction of those survived? So the same kinds of methods can be used for statistically querying big data when that data is distributed. And that's what I mean when I say technology, investing in technology itself can in some case change these trade-off curves. So my thought I want to leave you with is simply that we ought to work hard at really clearly describing the trade-offs that are at the heart of our policy issues. And then we ought to go and ask, is there a technology approach that can ameliorate that trade-off by shifting the curve? I'll stop there. Thank you.
So it's a real honor to follow Tom. First of all, it's an honor to be invited to participate today. Being a native West Virginian, it's always fun to come home, even though I'm not too far away in the state of Maryland. I was thinking back on my family history and how it might have some relationship to today. And I've looked through some of the genealogy records for my family and have been able to trace my family roots back to Virginia in the early 1600s. And my family resided in Essex County and Orange County, Virginia, until the 1830s. And I conjecture that at that time, when they picked up and moved to West Virginia, to Cabell County, West Virginia, there were probably some factors that influenced them. And I did some research, and there was a financial crisis in 1837 and a depression that lasted about 6 years. And I imagine that my great-great-great-grandfather decided that opportunities in Virginia weren't so good, and he looked westward, and he went across the mountains to Cabell County, where there was probably land to farm and perhaps grow tobacco and raise cattle. And it pretty much stayed that way until my grandfather passed away, and he had a farm in Cabell County. But just as my forefathers looked for opportunities to come to West Virginia, it's encouraging to me today that this group is looking for opportunities in a different frontier, the frontier of big data and AI and all such things. So that's really, really encouraging. I hope that young people today or people that have families come to West Virginia looking for those kind of opportunities. So I became the deputy CIO at NOAA about 3 years ago, and I just finished my 30th year at NOAA, and it's been a really great place to work during that time. We do some really exciting things. As I was introduced, it's always great to hear how the public perceives the things that NOAA does. And I'm here because Jim Estep, who is a fellow West Virginia Tech grad, had invited me to consider coming out here, and so I did, and I'm glad I'm here today. So let's get into it. So the next slide, please. Just a real quick agenda. I don't know if it'll go in exactly this order, but I'll try to touch these topics. Next slide, please. So NOAA has a presence in West Virginia and has had for several years up in Fairmont and probably others as well. At our research facility in Fairmont, we have three primary functions that we do. We have the GOES and JPSS satellite backup ground stations, and if you're not familiar with GOES, when you see the high-resolution weather data, satellite data, that is the GOES satellites that NOAA had launched in the past couple of years. Significantly better resolution than before, and able to now do all sorts of things that we couldn't do before. I recall that one of the hurricanes that was going into the Houston area, they were actually, the resolution was so good from the satellites that they were able to, when the eye wall passed over Houston, they were able to send out rescue squads to look for people that were trapped or stranded, and with enough accuracy to give them the minutes that they needed to be able to get out and get back. So they were able to do predictions like that based on the digital imagery from the satellite. The R&D HPC, the high-performance computing that resides in Fairmont site, I believe today we have 2 high-performance computers. We also have a computer that we gave to the FBI that they use. So there's quite a bit of high-performance computing capability in West Virginia. These are research and development computers. We have 2 operational supercomputers and R&D computers in Fairmont and in Boulder, Colorado. The third component that is in Fairmont is NOAA's Cybersecurity Center, and we have our Security Operations Center and incident response capabilities there, as well as hosting the Enterprise Security Operations Center for the Department of Commerce. So there's a lot of folks don't know what sits in that building with the satellite antennas out front, but there's a lot that goes on there, and it's very important to NOAA's mission. Next slide. So just some facts about NOAA's role in saving lives. I think everyone knows when there's a hurricane coming. NOAA's very active. Our Hurricane Center is making forecasts. Our accuracies, I heard something the other day with the most recent hurricane that came into the Florida coast and made that turn northward. And it contrasted that to, I think it was in the 70s, Hurricane Floyd approached the Florida coast in a similar fashion, and they ended up evacuating Jacksonville and a number of cities, and people had to spend their night in the car because of the traffic jams trying to get out of the city. And what actually happened, that hurricane took a similar track and turned northward. Had they had the accuracy of the forecast that we have today, they would have never had to evacuate Jacksonville and saved millions of dollars in the process. I I think it was about $1.5 billion or something like that was estimated was saved this year by not having to evacuate South Florida. So NOAA's capabilities for forecasting have improved dramatically through a combination of things, including better satellite imagery, better models that we run on the high-performance computers, the ability to develop new models with our R&D, high-performance computing, et cetera. I believe it was 2 years ago that we made a forecast 5 days out from the Carolinas on a hurricane impact, and we were within, when the hurricane actually hit the coast, we were within 1 mile of where we predicted it would be from 5 days before. So that's a pretty phenomenal thing. Next slide, please. So NOAA's role in the economy is pretty important as well. Weather-related industries and the accuracy of the weather, you can see the factoid there, about $4 trillion relies upon that information. NOAA is also involved in our Blue Economy Initiative. There's a huge amount of gross national product that's also affected by the oceans. And so NOAA relies upon big data for all of these things. We have, I believe, the largest embedded sensor suite in the world when you think about what we have in terms of satellite, ships, planes, buoys, coastal sensors, weather radars around the country. NOAA's got a huge amount of information that we collect. And our challenge is, how do we make sense of all of that data? If you look at the next slide, it gives sort of the graphic on the right just shows a variety of different satellites and sensing systems. And the point is that our trend is that we have more and more things that we monitor. We get information from the Europeans. We get information from some countries that aren't as friendly with us. We monitor the Earth's, the sun's surface. We monitor information at the bottom of the oceans. It's a really huge, big data set that NOAA manages. So our challenge is, as these sensing systems increase, how do we deal with that data? So the next slide. So in data's mind, big data is not so much the thing as open data. So we have all of this data. The question is, how do we make it accessible to the public and decision makers, and how do you make sense of that? So this is a couple of years old, but that trend has continued. And so if I were in a business and my business was selling information, this would be a really great trend. I would be making lots and lots of money. But as a federal agency, my budgets don't match that. So I have to find a way to meet that demand. This is the public's demand for data without getting more money. So about 5 years ago, NOAA hit upon an idea. I wish this had been my idea, but I work for a really smart guy, Zach Goldstein, who was one of the folks that came up with it. And the idea was that if NOAA were to make its data available to the big cloud providers, and these are names you recognize, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, and they were to then use their distribution through the cloud to get that information out to the public free of cost, NOAA could reduce the amount that we have to invest in our infrastructure because the cloud providers would take care of the distribution for us. And then in turn, the cloud providers could not sell the data, but could sell services related to that data. For instance, if they partnered with a small business that had some specialty in weather products, and they could do something with the data and then sell it as a new service, they could monetize that. 5 years later, I think that we're on the cusp of signing contracts with companies, and I think that we've proven that this is a business model that will work. So this is really huge for us to be able to provide more information without having to invest public dollars in it, make the information freely available, and do it in a way that's more secure for our infrastructure. I think that this has been a really huge success for us. So the value of our data is best realized when the public can access it to make decisions and for economic benefit. And that's a really important thing for West Virginia to consider in the big data era. Next slide, please. So from our perspective, we believe this is an open data initiative, we're an open data agency. We are not about confidential information, we're about readily available information. I just described a little bit about the big data project, and key here is leveraging data as an asset. So the partnership that we have with the big data companies has taught us a lot. It's taught us that the cloud providers don't understand the questions. They don't understand NOAA's data. We have expertise in that area. So that collaboration between us and cloud providers or third parties is really critical, because we can help define a problem that then smart people can come together to figure out how to use big data to find the answers to that question. Next slide. This is just another way of looking at it from an architectural perspective. NOAA data centers provide information to a data broker that then shares that information with the cloud providers that then make it readily available to the public. Next slide, please. As Tom was speaking about some of the roles that machine learning and AI can perform, I believe in one of them he'd shown me a picture of facial recognition, and how with machine learning and AI, you can actually start to sort of fill in the person's face based upon characteristics. This is information from the GO-17 satellite, and the information on the far left is good data, and you can see the information beside it. There's only one set of data that's good, and by using AI image correction, you can actually reconstruct that information to get good data on the right. So this is something that our satellite folks are looking at as a way to improve the data that comes from the satellites. Next slide. See if this will run. So while it's talking, or while it's going through this process, what you see here is in the top is a manual process, someone going through and identifying cyclonic activity, and below it is an AI generated capability. And what you'll see is they match up pretty well. So this was just a demonstration of how AI might be useful in helping identify weather conditions. But our high-performance computing, the statistics on the left, 120 petabytes of data, about 1.5 of new data per month. What's a petabyte? Does anybody know? So it's 1,000 times a terabyte. So if you have a terabyte drive from CDW or someplace, it's about 1,000 times that. And we have an archive of information in Fairmont that's racks and racks of equipment that store this data. The next statistic, 4 3/4 petaflops, and again, this is a measure of floating point operations, and something that high-performance computing learned some time ago was that GPUs are useful for performing lots of calculations very quickly, and this technology came from the video gaming industry. So anyway, that was that graphic. Go on the next slide, please. So data and government. So as a federal agency, we have some things that we're driven to do, either executive orders or acts passed by Congress, federal law. One such is the Evidence Act, and the Evidence Act basically directs federal agencies to default to open data unless there's a privacy or security concern with the data. The federal data strategy encourages agencies to view our data as a strategic asset, something that has intrinsic value, and to treat it as such. And I think that NOAA is trying to take that approach with the Big Data Initiative. And then the third, the executive order on artificial intelligence, has only been out shortly, but it's to encourage agencies to utilize emerging AI in supporting economic growth and scientific discovery and national security. So I believe that because of the big data initiative and NOAA's use of AI, that we're ahead of the curve from many federal agencies in this space. Next slide. So if you can see if this graphic video will run as well. So there's some interesting things that we found through the big data partnership. One of the things was one of our early successes was NexRad radar data. And so this is an example of a business case where using AI and using satellite imagery, the Interior was able to spot forest fires by what had been done before by people having to pore over these images and look for signs of forest fires, or having someone at a site looking visually out. They were able, with AI, to actually identify brush fires and forest fires early, to do an early detection. But as I was saying, an early example was NexRad radar data. We had about 30 years of data that was archived and was not seeing lots of use. And we made that available, and I believe it was Amazon was the first to host that data for us. And as a result, we saw the use of the data spike. The traffic in our data centers dropped off significantly of that data. And even our own scientists, we found, were actually using the Amazon hosted data because it was faster, easier to get to than the NOAA hosted data. So that was a really good sign for us. Something else interesting with the NexRad data, bird researchers were able to look at our imagery from this 30-year period, and were able to determine migratory patterns of birds based upon the birds being signatures of birds in the radar data. And so something totally unrelated, for the intent of that data, they had a scientific finding in. And so that's the thing about big data is by making data available and aggregating data from very many sources, sometimes very unrelated, you're able to make scientific discoveries in areas that you never anticipated. Next slide. So in terms of data and education, I think this was, I was ahead of me. This was the one about the migratory species. So next slide. So some challenges and opportunities. I'd read some recent surveys about over 3,000 companies around the world were surveyed on their use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And some key things came out of that information. And I think NOAA could also attest that we've seen similar things. One is a lack of skilled workforce. And so in terms of educational opportunities, the two, and I believe this was mentioned earlier, data scientists and data engineers are probably two of the most in-demand graduates in colleges today and in the industry today. The second area would be a lack of data, and many companies just did not have their data accessible where they could actually use it in a way to do discoveries or use it for business purposes. So the function of a data engineer, Tom probably could speak to this better than I can, but the data engineer is all about making data available in a big data way. How do you aggregate it? What tools can you use to aggregate it and whatnot? A data scientist then comes in and applies statistics and other techniques and tools to be able to answer questions with the data. And so those are really important skill sets that are in big demand today. And again, having the data in a way that it can be accessed. Another was company culture. But the interesting thing was, of these companies surveyed, something like 80% of them were involved in looking at AI in some way, and we're starting to make investments in AI. So the competition out there is looking at AI today and machine learning, and so the function that you guys are serving today is really, really important to make sure West Virginia is engaged in that. And then the last one was, again, difficulty in identifying the right use cases and questions. What is the important thing you're trying to solve with that data? Having come from West Virginia Tech years ago, I was in the cooperative education program there, and one of the benefits that I saw was being able to go out and apply what I learned in class in a workplace and then bring those lessons back to the classroom were immensely helpful for me. So I think that as you think about how you educate your students, you want to make sure that you teach them the tools and techniques, but also think about how you get them engaged out in the workplace. NOAA has recently created an IT intern program, and I'm happy to say our first cohort will be reporting this fall, and looking forward to providing these students opportunities to be involved with NOAA's big data, and look forward to working. I was speaking to the folks from WVU earlier about getting students down to our center in Fairmont to see what it's like in the real world. So I think that that's it. Appreciate the time today. Thank you so much. Petabytes of new data per month. What's a petabyte? Does anybody know? So it's 1,000 times a terabyte. So if you have a terabyte drive from CDW or someplace, it's about 1,000 times that. And we have an archive of information in Fairmont that's racks and racks of equipment that store this data. The next statistic, 4 3/4 petaflops, and again, this is a measure of floating point operations, and something that high-performance computing learned some time ago was that GPUs are useful for performing lots of calculations very quickly, and this technology came from the video gaming industry. So anyway, that was that graphic. Go on the next slide, please. So data in government. So as a federal agency, we have some things that we're driven to do, either executive orders or acts passed by Congress, federal law. One such is the Evidence Act, and the Evidence Act basically directs federal agencies to default to open data unless there's a privacy or security concern with the data. The federal data strategy encourages agencies to view our data as a strategic asset, something that has intrinsic value, and to treat it as such. And I think that NOAA is trying to take that approach with the Big Data Initiative. And then the third, the executive order on artificial intelligence, has only been out shortly, but it's to encourage agencies to utilize emerging AI in supporting economic growth and scientific discovery and national security. So I believe that because of the Big Data Initiative and NOAA's use of AI, that we're ahead of the curve from many federal agencies in this space. Next slide. So if you can see if this graphic video will run as well. So there's some interesting things that we found through the Big Data Partnership. One of the things was one of our early successes was NexRad radar data. And so this is an example of a business case where using AI and using satellite imagery, the Interior was able to spot forest fires by what had been done before by people having to pore over these images and look for signs of forest fires, or having someone at a site looking visually out. They were able, with AI, to actually identify brush fires and forest fires early, to do an early detection. But as I was saying, an early example was NexRad radar data. We had about 30 years of data that was archived and was not seeing lots of use. And we made that available, and I believe it was Amazon was the first to host that data for us. And as a result, we saw the use of the data spike. The traffic in our data centers dropped off significantly of that data, and even our own scientists, we found, were actually using the Amazon hosted data because it was faster, easier to get to than the NOAA hosted data. So that was a really good sign for us. Something else interesting with the NexRad data, bird researchers were able to look at our imagery from this 30-year period And we're able to determine migratory patterns of birds based upon the birds being signatures of birds in the radar data. And so something totally unrelated, for the intent of that data, they had a scientific finding in. And so that's the thing about big data is by making data available and aggregating data from very many sources, sometimes very unrelated, you're able to make scientific discoveries in areas that you never anticipated. Next slide. So in terms of data and education, I think this was, I was ahead of me. This was the one about the migratory species. So next slide. So some challenges and opportunities. I'd read some recent surveys about over 3,000 companies around the world were surveyed on their use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And some key things came out of that information. And I think NOAA could also attest that we've seen similar things. One is a lack of skilled workforce. And so in terms of educational opportunities, the two, and I believe this was mentioned earlier, data scientists and data engineers are probably two of the most in-demand graduates in colleges today and in the industry today. The second area would be a lack of data, and many companies just did not have their data accessible where they could actually use it in a way to do discoveries or use it for business purposes. So the function of a data engineer, Tom probably could speak to this better than I can, but the data engineer is all about making data available in a big data way. How do you aggregate it? What tools can you use to aggregate it and whatnot? A data scientist then comes in and applies statistics and other techniques and tools to be able to answer questions with the data. And so those are really important skill sets that are in big demand today. And again, having the data in a way that it can be accessed. Another was company culture. But the interesting thing was, of these companies surveyed, something like 80% of them were involved in looking at AI in some way, and we're starting to make investments in AI. So the competition out there is looking at AI today, machine learning, and so the function that you guys are serving today is really, really important to make sure West Virginia is engaged in that. And then the last one was, again, difficulty in identifying the right use cases and questions. What is the important thing you're trying to solve with that data? Having come from West Virginia Tech years ago, I was in the cooperative education program there, and one of the benefits that I saw was being able to go out and apply what I learned in class in a workplace and then bring those lessons back to the classroom were immensely helpful for me. So I think that as you think about how you educate your students, you want to make sure that you teach them the tools and techniques, but also think about how you get them engaged out in the workplace. NOAA has recently created an IT intern program, and I'm happy to say our first cohort will be reporting this fall, and looking forward to providing these students opportunities to be involved with NOAA's big data, and look forward to working. I was speaking to the folks from WVU earlier about getting students down to our center in Fairmont to see what it's like in the real world. So I think that that's it. Appreciate the time today. Thank you so much. Of new data per month. What's a petabyte? Does anybody know? So it's 1,000 times a terabyte. So if you have a terabyte drive from CDW or someplace, it's about 1,000 times that. And we have an archive of information in Fairmont that's racks and racks of equipment that store this data. The next statistic, 4 3/4 petaflops. And again, this is a measure of floating point operations. And something that high-performance computing learned some time ago was that GPUs are useful for performing lots of calculations very quickly, and this technology came from the video gaming industry. So anyway, that was that graphic. Go on the next slide, please. So data in government. So as a federal agency, we have some things that we're driven to do, either executive orders or acts passed by Congress, federal law. One such is the Evidence Act, and the Evidence Act basically directs federal agencies to default to open data unless there's a privacy or security concern with the data. The federal data strategy encourages agencies to view our data as a strategic asset, something that has intrinsic value, and to treat it as such. And I think that NOAA is trying to take that approach with the Big Data Initiative. And then the third, the executive order on artificial intelligence, has only been out shortly, but it's to encourage agencies to utilize emerging AI in supporting economic growth and scientific discovery and national security. So I believe that because of the Big Data Initiative and NOAA's use of AI, that we're ahead of the curve from many federal agencies in this space. Next slide. So if you can see if this graphic video will run as well. So there's some interesting things that we found through the Big Data Partnership. One of the things was one of our early successes was NexRad radar data. And so this is an example of a business case where using AI and using satellite imagery, the Interior was able to spot forest fires by what had been done before by people having to pore over these images and look for signs of forest fires, or having someone at a site looking visually out. They were able, with AI, to actually identify brush fires and forest fires early, to do an early detection. But as I was saying, an early example was NexRad radar data. We had about 30 years of data that was archived and was not seeing lots of use. And we made that available, and I believe it was Amazon was the first to host that data for us. And as a result, we saw the use of the data spike. The traffic in our data centers dropped off significantly of that data, and even our own scientists, we found, were actually using the Amazon hosted data because it was faster, easier to get to than the NOAA hosted data. So that was a really good sign for us. Something else interesting with the NexRad data, bird researchers were able to look at our imagery from this 30-year period, and were able to determine migratory patterns of birds based upon the birds being signatures of birds in the radar data. And so something totally unrelated, for the intent of that data, they had a scientific finding in. And so that's the thing about big data is by making data available and aggregating data from very many sources, sometimes very unrelated, you're able to make scientific discoveries in areas that you never anticipated. Next slide. So in terms of data and education, I think this was, I was ahead of me. This was the one about the migratory species. So next slide. So some challenges and opportunities. I'd read some recent surveys about over 3,000 companies around the world were surveyed on their use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And some key things came out of that information. And I think NOAA could also attest that we've seen similar things. One is a lack of skilled workforce. And so in terms of educational opportunities, the two, and I believe this was mentioned earlier, data scientists and data engineers are probably two of the most in-demand graduates in colleges today and in the industry today. The second area would be a lack of data, and many companies just did not have their data accessible where they could actually use it in a way to do discoveries or use it for business purposes. So the function of a data engineer, Tom probably could speak to this better than I can, but the data engineer is all about making data available in a big data way. How do you aggregate it? What tools can you use to aggregate it and whatnot? A data scientist then comes in and applies statistics and other techniques and tools to be able to answer questions with the data. And so those are really important skill sets that are in big demand today. And again, having the data in a way that it can be accessed. Another was company culture. But the interesting thing was, of these companies surveyed, something like 80% of them were involved in looking at AI in some way, and we're starting to make investments in AI. So the competition out there is looking at AI today and machine learning, and so the function that you guys are serving today is really, really important to make sure West Virginia is engaged in that. And then the last one was, again, difficulty in identifying the right use cases and questions. What is the important thing you're trying to solve with that data? Having come from West Virginia Tech years ago, I was in the cooperative education program there, and one of the benefits that I saw was being able to go out and apply what I learned in class in a workplace and then bring those lessons back to the classroom were immensely helpful for me. So I think that as you think about how you educate your students, you want to make sure that you teach them the tools and techniques, but also think about how you get them engaged out in the workplace. NOAA has recently created an IT intern program, and I'm happy to say our first cohort will be reporting this fall, and looking forward to providing these students opportunities to be involved with NOAA's big data, and look forward to working. I was speaking to the folks from WVU earlier about getting students down to our center in Fairmont to see what it's like in the real world. So I think that that's it. Appreciate the time today. Thank you so much.